Hey there, how are you?
How are you?
I'm good. Wild times.
I know, it's so crazy. Where are you located?
I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. How about you?
Seattle.
Okay, so you must already basically be in shelter in place.
Yeah, basically. I've been at
Gotcha.
home for 3 weeks now, actually.
Wow, that's tough.
Hey,
Hey, Jeremy, how you doing?
good. How about you?
I'm doing okay. Lucky me, I had a practice apocalypse because in 2018, my wife started having like just overnight huge problems with her back, where
Oh
she could
no.
like barely move. She's doing great now, but like basically we have like 9-10 months where we pretty much had to do this anyway. So
Well,
I've
good
had
good
my
practice for
chance
a
to
terrible
go.
reason.
Yeah, I've had my chance to go a little crazy and like get into the swing of things doing this already.
I guess that's good. Yeah. Sucks about the pack though.
Silver linings.
Yep.
Okay, we'll give it a extra, minute or two. Think
Yeah.
everybody's deserves a little grace period these days.
Yeah, also the submariner meeting ran way over and it's still running, so I don't think we're going to see any of those folks until, I don't know.
Cool.
I don't
How
know
are
if
you
they're-
doing, Josh?
Oh, okay. Things are a little crazy because um, we've gone straight into canceling all the events this spring into now wanting to run virtual events for everything this spring.
Mhm.
And somehow I feel like I'm one of like 4 people in Red Hat who has any experience doing that. So
It's an in-demand skill. You're ahead of the curve.
yeah, I know, but I'm like, I actually have another job that involves producing Kubernetes. The,
All right. Well, I see we've got a healthy group of people here. Why don't we get started? Hector, I know that you put something on the agenda about wanting reviews of metrics. Do you want to like just say a few words about that?
Yeah, so basically I added custom metrics from QFed for those operations we identified could be given as pointers about where scalability bottlenecks might be, and also just for having a future QFed based Grafana dashboard. So yeah, I created an initial PR with those, and also I attached in the same PR a cap with the intention of those metrics. So if anyone can have a additional review to the PR, that would be awesome.
Sure. So I've given it a once over. It seems pretty reasonable to me so far. I know you had a couple of things that you wanted to clean up about it. So I'll definitely give you a review later on. But if anybody would like to has experience with metrics and wants to take a look, I'm sure that would be appreciated.
Yeah, thank you.
So the other thing on the agenda that that I added was that there's been this very healthy discussion about like same namespace or namespace sameness across multiple clusters. And modulo anybody's opinion on that subject, I think we should decide how we want to record things that I would maybe call pre-API principles that like aren't part of any like code API so far, but they're fundamental to capture explicitly so that like we have a explicit list of principles that we reason from. So I wondered if folks had an opinion on what the best way to record that is, not on their opinion on the question itself, which I'm very happy to talk about. But like initially, let's just talk about how do we want to record the outcome of that discussion?
Yeah, I mean, GitHub seems to make sense. Maybe GitHub pages. I don't know if there's a lot of precedence for this kind of non-API statement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm really not sure. I guess, you know, it doesn't feel quite right to capture it in a KEP. It doesn't feel like there's an obvious GitHub location to put it in. Tim, I wonder if you have any opinions about this.
No, I mean, I went through the same thought process that you just did. Like, well, we should put it in a KEP. There's not really an enhancement. There's no work to be done to go with it, at least not yet, and maybe ever. It's not a doc in that we'd want to put it up on the website. It's not, I don't know, it's not like, we don't really have a whole lot of these, right? So, you know, the best answer that I can come up with would be something like, let's request a SIG repo that is like notes or working docs or infrastructure for multi-cluster, and we put this in there as part of that. Alternatively, there's community. Isn't there a SIG section under community? So maybe that's the right place. Let me see. I've got that repo checked out. So
is this are these principles not something, not this one in particular maybe, but something that would want to go on the website as a doc? Like how do I use Kubernetes in this scenario? Seems like
maybe, but like absent any implementations, I don't think it's something we want to put in front of people because they're just going to look at it and say, well, what do I do with this?
That's true.
Right.
Right.
So there are like SIG folders under community.
Yeah.
At one point, the markdowns that lived in those things were like people wrote them by hand. I think they're generated now. I think there might be a place under the sigs.yaml file in the root of that repo that we could at least put a link in there to something. One idea that I had, which is like extremely cheap and like doesn't necessarily put the cart before the horse in terms of officiality, would be, what if we make, like, we've got this like very well-known Google Doc, Tim, that you wrote up about your musings. Could we write a Google Doc that was like record of pre-API principles?
We could. I don't like, I mean, I love Google Docs, don't get me wrong. I don't like the lack of history and attributability. I'm looking at community repo again. So there's like under community contributors, there's design proposals, which is mostly defunct and replaced with KEPs. But under contributors, there's also devel and guide, which are like docs for how to contribute to the project. Not exactly what we're thinking about here either.
Yeah. I'm liking the idea of like putting a markdown under community/SIG multicluster more and more. It gives us the attributability. It gives us the PR process and like review and just normal way of working with things. And if there's a point in time when there's an API that reflects these principles, it can become part of the KEP that defines that API.
And you know what, looking at other places, there are some of these other SIG directories have other files in there, Like API machinery has API extensions position statement. That seems like an exact analog of what we're
Yeah.
talking about here, right?
There we go. Bam.
And some of the other ones have postmortems or stuff that's migrated from their wikis or triage stuff or meeting notes or blog posts. So this, I think that's the right place to put it. I don't know if there's overall governance for like guidance on what to do in there, but that seems like the right home to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, especially with API machinery, that's direct precedence.
Okay.
I'm comfortable with that. So I'm not hearing any objections either. What about the actual evaluation of that principle? Like, there's been a really healthy discussion on the mailing list. Since I have the bully pulpit, I'll start with my own opinion, which is that I think personally, the principle of like namespace sameness across clusters within at least a flotilla or a group of clusters is very reasonable. I think it will capture probably an 80% type swath of what people are doing. I will also say that it is impossible to make everybody happy. There is literally no like principle that we could write in this way that would not have somebody saying that's not what I do.
Yeah, I think that's true. Anybody here who was on that conversation, thank you. It's not over. Please keep it going. It's a great conversation. It was very enlightening. And anybody who wasn't participating in it, please go read it because I think it was very interesting.
Probably one of the best like mailing list discussions we've ever had in this group.
Over what amounted to like 20 sentences or something. I think the biggest concern comes with what actually defines that group. And the statement was very intentionally not defining a group, but
The group of clusters.
Yeah, just hand waving that there exists a group and you have to decide for yourself what the scope of that group is. When you look at use cases like what Sandor was proposing, I felt like I didn't get to respond to his last messages, but I felt like what he's proposing is actually a lot of groups, not a single group.
Yeah, that was I actually did respond this morning, and that was kind of, that was my takeaway is, yeah, it's a lot of separate groups, which is totally fine. You could even decide that you wanted your group to be individual clusters. There's nothing stopping
right.
that. It just means you don't take advantage of whatever we decide to do with this sameness. But
or take advantage of all of it. Like in the abstract, it's really hard to say, right? Like we have ideas of other multi-cluster features that we would like to see happen across these groups, but none of them exist.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Does anybody feel like the principle that Jeremy described in that email thread is like unreasonable as an 80% type appeal thing?
Sorry to argue with ourselves. The only question I have is for those people who've already implemented something that isn't that, what does it mean? Like, I don't intend to invalidate other people's work. Obviously, we don't have that authority. Does it mean that like people have to abide by this in order to build SIG approved features, or does it mean that this is a sort of something you keep in your mind, but it's really more of a suggestion?
So my own version of that would be, I don't think like so I don't think that this SIG is in a position to validate or invalidate what somebody may have already made their own decision to do. In the same way that like we at one point had like a template feature accepted into Kubernetes that wasn't wound up being implemented in Kube, but the presence of that thing does not invalidate help, right? And like the community is so large and people have just such a wide variety and volume of use cases that like, I don't personally want to be in the position of saying something that you went on your own and did is invalid because it's your choice.
Right.
I think what it means to me is that that features that we would build or projects that we would build would have that principle as like one of their foundational principles. And so if you make a decision to like have already made a decision that isn't aligned with that, it means that like your decision may effectively be that like you've gone your own way, right?
Right.
It doesn't mean that it's invalid. It just means that you made a decision to do that, and that's okay. Like,
But
I have no qualms with that.
Does it carry the implication that if you wanted the SIG to sponsor your project, you have to abide by this?
That's a really good question. I feel like it would be confusing and inconsistent for the SIG to sponsor projects that like were very pointedly against or contrary to like what we ultimately build up as a list of principles. My own 2 cents.
And that makes sense to me, as long as I guess we keep the idea that all principles are mutable
Yeah.
in the face of evidence.
Right, and all APIs are alpha until they graduate, right? Personally, I think like, I think it will reward us to like be thoughtful and measured in what we do around new projects and new APIs. There's really no purpose to be served by rushing anything. So I expect that anybody following the SIG's work will have plenty of time to like react.
Yeah.
Anybody else
that
have
makes sense.
opinions? And if you don't agree to that particular principle, you can treat individual clusters as groups of size 1.
Exactly. That's kind of one of the things that we're leaving open for. It's just that if you adopt that principle, then you can assume that anything that we end up building on that principle will work.
Mm-hmm. And you may say, I effectively have a bunch of clusters that are groups of size 1. It does not mean that you'll never want to increase the size of that group to 2.
Right. And actually, I saw some of the comments on Sendar's specific use cases, which sort of was getting towards that, right? Like, even if you don't do it today, you might want to do it later. And so leaving room might make sense.
Yeah. So I think lazy consensus is like important as a value in our community. I don't want to go making a decision in a SIG meeting. And I know that I have yet to like respond to this thread. But I wonder like what the right way to drive this down is. Like I am not hearing a strong like objection to accepting that principle in this meeting. And I'm not necessarily even like reading it when I skim through the thread. It's just that some people have already made a choice that's different than it.
So given the extenuating circumstances of the world today, procedurally, I feel like we should give this breathing room. Would it make sense to, like, Jeremy, I'll throw it back on you, craft this into a MD file against community and leave it open for some defined period of time to try to accumulate any other naysayers, feedback, wordsmithing, etc.?
Yeah.
Extended
Yeah,
period of time being, I don't know, a month or something, right?
Is
Yeah,
it
that
worth
makes sense to me.
is it worth calling this a KEP to get some eyes on it?
The problem is I've spent a lot of time staring at KEP and the KEP template, and like the KEP template is almost entirely about life cycle and technical details. There isn't a
Yeah.
technical detail here.
Okay.
And about graduation of an API, right?
Yeah.
Or a feature.
Okay. Does that sound like
Cool.
a plan then?
Sounds like a plan.
I'll get that together then.
Okay. Is it? I think that's our agenda then for today. Is there anything else folks want to talk about?
I actually did want to talk about the multi-cluster service API as well.
All right. Let's do it.
And just basically that doc's been around for a while. It's got a lot of attention from this SIG, from SIG Network, and some people from Istio have commented on it as well. There's still some open questions and things we need to figure out, but if there's no objections, I'd like to make it a little more real. And I guess trying to figure out what the best way to do that would be. Would it be a KEP? Would it be a SIG project?
I think that is a KEP.
Okay.
Yeah, I would also view that as a KEP, and it may wind up being implemented in a SIG project, but I think that is a very good fit for what the KEP process is geared.
Okay.
I mean, ultimately it'll end up with a CRD or something, right? So there will actually
Exactly.
be code.
Right. There will be real code. There will be at least one CRD. So yeah, I guess maybe I just start the process of making a KEP so that we get more eyes on it and can kind of drive the open questions to conclusion. Is any issues with that?
I think that sounds great.
Perfect.
Only the issues that have already been opened, Jeremy.
Yes. And there are a few, so still work to be done.
Awesome.
How's everybody holding up? Is everybody doing all right?
I'm doing okay so far. How about everybody else?
I'm doing pretty good.
I
My
thought when
dog
all
is losing
these
his mind.
Yeah, I thought when all this travel got taken off my schedule that would mean that I actually had more time
I felt the same
to
way,
work on
John.
real things, and somehow that hasn't happened so far.
I thought, oh, good, I get 2 weeks of my life back. And it turns out that I guess I'm seeing what would have been backlogged during these 2 weeks. So maybe, sorry to break the human kind of connection. I can throw one small item on towards the agenda. Topology. So in the face of multi-cluster, topology becomes important, especially if we're going to try to blend services across clusters. It is pretty important that if we're going to try to do anything automatic, that automatic considers cross-zonal, cross-continental connections as maybe less ideal than local connections. This is not news. The SIGNet side actually had a KEP for a topology API, and that API actually went to alpha. As an API, it makes some pretty serious trade-offs and it forces the user to make some pretty serious trade-offs. And I've been contemplating that for a while, and I wrote a note to SIG Network week before last saying, maybe we should put the brakes on that topology API because the trade-offs are so egregious. My feeling is that we can do a lot better automatically. And while it falls entirely under the purvey of SIG Network to do and own that work, the automatic topology stuff, I think a lot of it is motivated by this work. And so it might make sense to have some collaboration there for people who are interested in this topic. The proposal is basically, how far could we go if we just automatically figured out the sort of cost metrics between clusters and use that to populate things like kube proxies or whatever proxies we're doing. to bias towards local. It's very hand wavy. I don't really know exactly what that heuristic would be, but I started to lay out maybe some ideas for exploring it. Personally, it's something I'd really like to explore. It's one of those engineering projects I'd really like to roll up my sleeves and get into. Pragmatically, I'm not going to have enough time to really drive on it. If anybody else here, this is not I don't need anybody to commit to me right now, but if anybody is interested in that topic, let me know, reach out to me, and I would love to just brainstorm.
So what I think I heard, Tim, is basically I evaluated what you said in the scope of like multi-cluster services. And so what I heard in terms of like the specifics of what you were thinking about from like a technology standpoint is that in a cluster that consumes a multi-cluster service, to bias toward network links that are like in the highest priority cluster local.
Not necessarily cluster local, although maybe.
Or at least like, what's the right word? Just closer in geographic proximity or topological proximity?
Exactly. In cloud provider land, we'd say you'd want something in your same zone. Now, there may be reasons to bias towards same cluster also, but topologically, you can have two clusters in the same zone and they are equidistant from each other network-wise.
If I can, jump in. From Istio perspective, it would be useful to have some policy or some control over how they are routed based on our customer feedback on multi-cluster.
Cool.
It's clearly something we want. Also in the gateway, I don't know if gateway is part of the networking SIG or not, but it has similar requirements in terms of topology and ability to control traffic.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It would be good to be aligned.
This definitely spans networking and multi-cluster. I think multi-cluster just exacerbates it. You're not going to set up a cluster generally that spans two sides of a continent, but you might set up a multi-cluster flotilla that does, and you don't want to accidentally be traversing the continent when you don't have to.
Right.
One more thing, because I have to go at 10. Don't forget multiple networks, because that's one of the biggest problems in Istio. Part of topology or whatever, since the IPv4 is so restricted. I put some comments in the doc as well. Part of this, we need to include some information about how to reach a remote cluster if it's not flat network.
Yes, I agree. We'll need to accommodate that somehow.
And maybe part of the same topology, because it's really kind of topology. Okay, I have to go.
Thanks, Karsten.
Could this be viewed as an extension to the existing service topology?
Possibly. I'm a little bit down on the service topology API, in part, and I'm happy to provide a link if anybody wants to read the thing I wrote. I sent on the SIG network mailing list, but
I think that would be great.
Basically, I'll do that. The real problem is that forcing the user to express it means that they have to take on these trade-offs that are sort of egregious trade-offs. The topology API as expressed was really, biased towards easy implementation and not easy use. And I think in hindsight, that's the wrong trade-off. In fact, in the history of Kubernetes, I've often been the person saying no to APIs because we haven't done enough automatically yet. I'm thinking about HPC stuff. Anybody who's dealt with me on the node CPU scheduling, CPU pinning side of things knows that I've often been the naysayer there. And then I went and I did the wrong thing on the topology side. So I'm coming back and revisiting sort of my own decision there. And I think I was wrong. And I think we need to explore it automatically. And I think the best we can do, in really the truest sense of the best thing we can do is a heuristic that helps the traffic to try to stay local, but doesn't necessarily guarantee it. And then if that's not sufficient, then we bust out the API.
Yeah, that makes sense to me as well. And in particular, so I can see it would be very nice to have sort of automatic nice defaults. And at the same time, we're looking at use cases in Submariner where you do want to be able to say that you have unusual requirements. Like, for instance, there are scenarios where you want to explicitly have direct traffic towards a cluster in your flotilla that's not in your current availability zone because you want to use it for replication, disaster recovery, things like that. That would have to be expressed.
You want to access something that's outside of your local cluster?
Yeah, well, we'd want to be able to say, you have this service, and obviously, like you're saying, it's nicer to keep traffic local or get your results quicker and so on. But there are some scenarios where we'd want to ensure that some specific requests go to this particular service, but on another cluster in the flotilla, so that we're sure that data is replicated, for example.
Oh, for replication. I get you.
Yeah.
Yes, that's an interesting challenge. Sure. I posted the link to the discussion on SIG Network.
Yeah, thanks.
On the chat here. That was all I had. I wanted to throw that back out and let people know that it's as yet unresolved.
I got a 404 when I visited that link.
What?
Yeah, dude.
Yeah, same for me.
Hold on, maybe my Google internal. Well, that's an error. All right, hold on.
My bias in general is toward simplicity of use. Like, I will just put my hand up as somebody that, like, early on in Cube, I definitely feel like I was doing some features for ease of implementation versus ease of use. Like, many things involving secrets that we, like, eventually relaxed or changed, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, I learned a lot from those things.
Yeah, it turns out doing the right thing is generally the right thing. Oh, it was interesting because my Google internal URL changed it. Thanks, groups. Let me try again. So let me try that one. Does it work better?
Let's see here. Well, that one took me to Red Hat SSO, so I think that probably works a little better.
All right.
Works.
That one worked for
Yeah,
me, but that doesn't mean anything. So.
Cool. All right. Everybody wants a half hour of their life back?
Sounds like it.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
All right. Stay safe. Take care of yourselves.
You too, Paul.
Yeah, you too.
All right. Take care. Bye.